Well, it's time for Privacy Talks. Privacy Talks brings you interviews between Privacy News Online's Caleb Chen and influencers, activists, and experts from pro-privacy organizations around the world. Now let's go to Caleb, who recently caught up with Micah Lee from the Intercept to talk about whistleblowing, journalism, and the security required when they intersect.
Hello and welcome to Privacy Talks. This is Caleb Chen from Privacy News Online, and today I am speaking with Micah Lee, the Director of Information Security at the Intercept. Micah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. We're very excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So firstly, could you tell us a little bit about what you do in your position as Director of Information Security at First Look Media, the organization behind the Intercept?
So I split my job kind of between normal security team work. So things like making sure that our employees' laptops and our servers are secure, monitoring for phishing attacks, that sort of thing. And then I also do a lot of newsroom security, newsroom-specific stuff related to source protection and making sure that documents are redacted before we publish them and things like that. And then also, I do some investigative journalism myself.
That's awesome. So how and why was First Look Media started?
So it started really as the company behind the Intercept. It started at the same time that the Intercept started, and this was in 2013. And it was basically started to publish Snowden documents. The two journalists that Snowden leaked documents to about NSA and GCHQ's mass surveillance were Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras. And they basically decided to start a new media organization together to really be kind of like fearless, unlike a bunch of the other media organizations that were publishing Snowden documents, to really like just publish what's in the public interest. And so then that's when the Intercept was founded. And that's around when I was hired as well.
Could you walk us through what steps in your career led to your current position at First Look Media?
Yeah, so let's see. From a very young age, I've been super interested in writing code and in learning about hacking and computer security. And I spent like several years doing freelance web development, just working for small businesses and whoever else I could find before I finally landed a pretty awesome gig at EFF, at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And so I worked as a web developer there for a few years, and then I also, at some point, switched from being a web developer to being a staff technologist. So my job was like explaining encryption to journalists and working on privacy tools. Like I used to be the maintainer of the browser add-on HTTPS everywhere, and worked on trying to make more of the web encrypted. And so while I was at EFF, some other people at EFF and me founded a new organization called Freedom of the Press Foundation. And I ended up being basically building the website and all of the technical infrastructure for that organization. And then just about a month or so after Freedom of the Press Foundation launched, that's when Edward Snowden was starting to leak his documents. And then I kind of had a role in that. He anonymously reached out to me. I didn't know who he was. But he wanted me to, he noticed that I use PGP email encryption. And he was pretty sure that Laura Poitras did too. And he knew that Glenn Greenwald didn't. And he wanted my help basically getting their public keys, verifying them, teaching Glenn Greenwald how to use encryption and things like that. I didn't know who he was, but I helped anyway. And so I kind of did a lot of tech support around that whole act of whistleblowing. And so then when Laura Poitras and Glenn Greenwald started the Intercept, they hired me to do security. And so since then, I've been working at the Intercept and kind of recently, like within the last year or so, I'm now the director of information security. So I'm in charge of just InfoSec for the whole organization.
So how do you feel about being characterized as the Intercept's digital bodyguard? Do you have a more preferred way of describing the impact of your work, or is that good?
That's pretty good, yeah.
Awesome. So along that line, what kind of security precautions does First Look Media have in place that other big name media companies might not have?
So one thing that we do is, in certain circumstances, we host a lot of our own infrastructure. So when you use hosting services like Amazon AWS or other hosting services, they're really convenient for a lot of ways, but you run the risk of your hosting provider being able to kind of spy on your data. So for example, we have systems in place for journalists to be able to like securely log in and search a data set. And so when we do stuff like that, we make sure that we host it in-house on servers that we control. So that's one thing. Let's see. A handful of our journalists actually use Cubes, the operating system that is very secure and everything is running in virtual machines. And then when we have very sensitive stories, we make use of like air-gapped computers that have their networking stuff physically removed, never connected to a network, never connected to the internet, so it's way harder to hack. And then also I think one thing that we do that a lot of other newsrooms don't do is we have a dedicated security team, and we have a whole protocol for when there's a sensitive story coming up, making sure that people on the security team are involved in coming up with a threat model, figuring out what we need to do for source protection and things like that.
Do you feel that journalists in general at the Intercept and elsewhere have become more tech savvy and or privacy conscious over the last decade?
I think that they definitely have. And I mean, I think that there's still a ways to go, but for example, nearly every journalist that I know uses Signal and understands the importance of at least basic security. And I think that didn't used to be the case at all. So yeah, I think that there's been a big improvement.
That's good to hear confirmed. You mentioned this earlier, but could you tell us a little bit more about what the Freedom of the Press Foundation has been up to since 2013?
Yeah, let's see. It's been doing a lot of stuff. One of the big things that it does is it runs the Secure Drop project, which is whistleblower submission software. So it's basically software that newsrooms, including like all of the big newsrooms in the United States and a bunch of them around the world, they have a Secure Drop server, and it's basically a Tor Onion service where sources can go to contact journalists anonymously and to upload documents, have back and forth conversations. So that's one of the big things that it does. And similarly, it also does a lot of digital security training for newsrooms. So there's like a team of security trainers that go around to newsrooms, teach people how to use password managers, lock down their accounts with two-factor authentication, and do a bunch of other stuff like that. And one thing that I've actually been really excited about that Freedom of the Press Foundation has been doing is the U.S. Press Freedom Tracker. This basically has been around since the Trump administration started, so since like the beginning of 2017, and it's been tracking violations of press freedom. But it has really exploded since the George Floyd Black Lives Matter protests, because police have just been attacking journalists in the streets. And so actually, one thing here, let me pull up the latest from September 3rd. The Press Freedom Tracker has tracked 783 total press freedom incidents, including 105 arrests, 195 physical attacks, 133 of them were from cops. Let's see, 87 equipment or newsroom damage. So it's been pretty bad. And it's cool that this is actually being tracked.
Well, that leads right into the next question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the United States on freedom of the press right now? And if you could also maybe give a number for, say, a year ago, pre-George Floyd protests.
So 1 is the worst.
Yes, 1 is the worst, 10 is the best.
I would say right now it's maybe like a 4. And the reason is it's pretty bad. There's, Trump has been calling the media the enemy of the people. It's never good when the leader of the country goes to war with the media, because the media is an incredibly important part of, sustaining democracy. Police are attacking journalists in the streets. It's been a tactic starting with, the Obama administration, continued through the Trump administration to use the Espionage Act against whistleblowers and sources, and it's being used more and more. So it's all pretty bad, but it's not I still think that it's better than some places. I think that it's better than places where, authoritarians have a complete grip on everything. We can still publish what we want to publish without getting arrested. There's a few cases where it's especially risky, but it's still better than a lot of places. And then I guess in terms of a year ago, I don't know, I'd say a year ago, maybe it was 6, now it's 4.
So a downward trend.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to a potential whistleblower listening to this interview on how to securely get information to journalists?
So I would say that the first thing to do is consider your digital trails. Think about all the evidence that you leave behind when you do anything on your phone or on a computer at all. So for example, if you search for something on Google, if you're logged into a Google account, there's a good chance that your search query is saved on Google's server. There's a chance that your search query is saved in your browser's history. And even if your search query isn't saved on Google's server, Google still knows what it is, right? So, this definitely also applies to stuff that you do at your workplace. So if you're a whistleblower, you have access to some sort of restricted information and you want to expose it, keep in mind that the restricted information that you have access to, that stuff's all being logged too. If you log into some database and you download a document from it, the fact that you logged in at this date and that you downloaded this document is being logged somewhere. So you just have to know that this is what you're up against, is everything is under surveillance. And so I think that that's the most important thing, because I think that a lot of whistleblowers just don't really have a concept that this is what's going on. And so then beyond that, I would say try to do as much, don't use your work devices for any of this stuff, except for, getting the document to begin with. As soon as you can stop using work devices, stop using them, because they all have, corporate spyware. Use personal devices if you can. You do as much as you can without leaving traces. So use Tor browser. Tor browser, will keep you anonymous, but also unlike, all other web browsers, it doesn't record a history. When you close Tor browser, there is no evidence of what happened in Tor browser when it was open. So using Tor browser a lot is good. And then, I would say when you're picking a journalist to contact, try and do it in a secure way, in an anonymous way. Using SecureDrop is a great way. Signal is a great tool to use, but there's problems with anonymity. If you're using encrypted messaging apps, be aware that they are encrypted, which means, the service you're using can't spy on them, but they're not encrypted when they're on your phone. So if you have if you open up Signal or WhatsApp or something on your phone and you have a conversation with the journalist going back and forth, and then your phone gets searched, they can read that conversation. So make sure to turn on disappearing messages, delete conversations when you don't need them anymore. be aware of like adding journalists to your contacts on your phone, because your contacts might get synced to like Apple or to Google and things like that. So everything's under surveillance. Be slow and careful. Yeah, that's my advice.
Slow and careful. Slow and steady wins the race.
Yes.
Let's take a step back and have like a little general question here. Why are whistleblowers important? And as an extreme example, what might the world be like without whistleblowers?
So in a lot of organizations where information is very tightly controlled and where they're doing things that are very wrong, a lot of times whistleblowers are the only way that things can change at all. The only way that information can come out. And I think that an extreme example would be that maybe the Vietnam War would have lasted an extra 10 years, 20 years, right? Because one of the big ways that the Vietnam War ended was when the whistleblower Daniel Ellsberg leaked the Pentagon Papers to a bunch of journalists. The Pentagon Papers were kind of like the secret classified history of the Vietnam War, and they proved that the government had been lying to the American people about the war, about how successful it was going. And when all of that stuff, when all of these revelations from the Pentagon Papers were made public, that kind of like forced Congress to act, and it kind of accelerated the end of the Vietnam War. So, I'm glad that we're not still in the Vietnam War, and I think that whistleblowers are to thank for that.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned previously that the current administration is continuing the use of the Espionage Act to prosecute whistleblowers. Do you feel that whistleblower laws around the world are changing for the better, for the worse? And as a side question, do you think that Edward Snowden could ever be pardoned?
I'm not sure if whistleblower laws are changing for the better or for the worse. I think that people in power are always going to hate whistleblowers, like regardless of what the law says. Like there are currently whistleblower laws in the United States, and basically, the intelligence community and the military are exempt from them. Basically, I mean, like there are mechanisms, but like the history is when whistleblowers in these agencies try to go through those mechanisms, they get their house raided and they get retaliated against. So it's like it doesn't actually work. I don't know if it's getting better or not, but I do know that transparency and like public support is one of the best ways to protect whistleblowers. It's always going to be a fight, and so I think that it's important for us to support them. And I don't know. I mean, I certainly hope that Snowden gets pardoned. He deserves a pardon. I hope that Trump pardons him. Trump has been talking about like floating the idea of maybe pardoning Snowden. It's the end of his term. If he's going to pardon him, it might be in the next few months. I know that if he did, it would probably not be for the same reasons that I would want him to be pardoned for, but I don't care. I think it would be great if he was pardoned.
Right on. So you mentioned earlier that you used to contribute for the HTTPS Everywhere extension. What other security and or privacy related projects are you contributing to now?
One project that I've been working a whole lot on lately is OnionShare. It's an open source tool that I developed I think in 2014, and that now is has a big team of developers, a big community, and it basically lets you share files anonymously over the Tor network, and also do some other stuff. Like you can use it to make yourself a little anonymous Dropbox where people can send files to you. You could host Onion websites, so dark web websites easily. It's all very user friendly, and I'm excited about it. And hopefully the next few months we'll have another big release, which will include a lot of stuff, but including a way of throwing up a little temporary, ephemeral, completely anonymous and encrypted chat room.
Looking forward to seeing that. You mentioned that this is all free and open source software. So how important would you say free and open source software is to the work that you do and to the industry in general?
I think it's incredibly important. I think that it's kind of like the core of most of the work that I do relies on open source software. And in a lot of ways, it's more trustworthy than proprietary software. There's been a long history now of proprietary software that says that it's secure, but it actually doesn't work the way that it's marketed as working. For example, Zoom. We're in Zoom right now. For years, Zoom claimed to support end-to-end encrypted video calls, but that was actually just a lie. They defined their own definition of what end-to-end encrypted means, and it didn't actually mean end-to-end encrypted. It means they can still see all the content of the calls. So free software, I think, is incredibly important because it doesn't have issues like that as much. And also it's important that it's free and accessible to more people because, companies always have a profit motive and it's difficult for them to give anything away for free without, turning you into a product. And so open source software means that like anyone in the world has access to encryption, and it's not like you have like the weak lower class encryption that has a back door and then the rich people get like good encryption that you pay for, right? It's like everyone has access to everything, and that's getting more important as we go forward. And so I think that open source software is a really key component to that.
Very key indeed. So earlier you gave some advice to a potential or aspiring whistleblower. What advice would you give to an aspiring journalist or activist on how to be secure enough to be effective?
I would say just start with the basics, and really the basics are mostly what you need to do. If you are using a password manager and making sure that you don't reuse the same password on multiple sites. Every website, every service, use a different unique password. Keep track of it all in a password manager so you don't have to memorize it because it's impossible to memorize 100 passwords. So use password managers. Make sure like all of your important accounts, look in your security settings and lock it down as much as you can. So like turn on two-factor authentication, get used to using an authenticator app on your phone. And use encrypted messaging apps instead of using like SMS or talking to people over like Facebook Messenger. Use Signal. It's just as easy to use, much more secure. Just get in the habit of just if encryption is available and easy, just use it. And I think that's like really. I think if everybody did that, everybody would be a lot more secure. But also, it's good to familiarize yourself with VPNs and Tor if you're going to be doing some research and you don't want the website that you're visiting knowing who you are, and being aware of like what's being saved in the cloud and what's accessible to who. So like if you're working and sharing documents with someone using Google Drive, be aware that all those documents could be accessible to the police because Google has access to it and they can get a subpoena. So if it's something where you're like, I'm preparing a direct action, you don't want the police to know about it, don't use Google Drive for that stuff. Use something else. You could use like key-based file system to share documents or something. There's lots of ways of doing things, but just think about who has access to what. I'd say that's that's what I would say.
That's great advice. So lastly, while we've talked about a lot of dire and serious things today, let's end on a happy note. What is something that you're looking forward to?
Okay, so this is still pretty dire. I'm looking forward to being able to breathe outside again because I'm in California and it's smoke season and the sky is like a dystopian orange and it's unhealthy to breathe. But on a less dire note, that's gonna be great when I can breathe outside, but I've been playing Shadowrunner video games, which are pretty great. They're a few years old. I just discovered them, so I'm looking forward to playing some more Shadowrunner video games. They're like cyberpunk / urban fantasy RPGs.
Check that out myself. So that's it for the questions today. Thanks again, Micah, for joining us. To our viewers, if you'd like to read The Intercept or learn more about First Look Media, please check out the links below. Thank you for watching this Privacy News Online special feature. Make sure you subscribe to see more interviews like this, as well as the top privacy news stories from around the world. Till the next time.
Privacy News Online is brought to you by Private Internet Access, the award-winning no-log VPN service who reminds you to always use protection.